mean, what?
20, oh, I don't know what I'm at. I'm not good. I've had glasses since I was in fifth grade.
Good evening, and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. An additional hearing for cases of tonight's agenda will not be conducted with the city council. However, an item might be referred back to the planning commission by a majority vote of the city council if one of these three items occurs. The person alleges there was an unfair hearing by the planning commission, or the new facts or evidence have been filed with city clerk by 5 p.m. on the Wednesday prior to the council meeting, or third, the council determines further deliberation is needed by the planning commission. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at www.topeka.org. Many of tonight's cases involve public hearings. For those cases, the procedures will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes each. With that, please call roll.
Mr. Beardmore?
Here.
Mr. Beck?
Here.
Mr. Crook?
Here.
Ms. Cuevas Stubblefield is absent this evening. Mr. Gels is absent. Mr. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Jefferson?
Here.
Ms. Jordan?
Here.
Mr. Lackey is also absent. We have 6 members present and have a quorum.
Chris. Before we get started, we do have a new face with us on the commission tonight, and I did just want to recognize her. Ms. Carol Jordan has joined us, and we are honored and happy to have you on board, and welcome.
Me too, thank you.
We'll move on to the approval of minutes from September 16th. Any amendments, corrections, motions?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Approved and second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes. Item C is any communications to the commission. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I might add that you conveniently forgot that you were also reappointed yourself to another term. So congratulations on re-upping your contract with us.
Thank you.
We look forward to the next couple years. Yes, the commission had some communications passed out. The agenda for next week, October 28th policy meeting, which is just conveniently also tomorrow will be on our website. After you received it tonight, we will put it on our website tomorrow, topeka.org/planning for those interested in viewing it. In terms of our upcoming schedule and the rest of the year, I just wanted to let you know the meetings. We do expect to meet in November with both our third and fourth Monday meetings. We will only have one meeting in December, the third Monday. We thought you might not want to come here on Christmas Eve. Just a thought. So we're going to do away with the second meeting in December. So now you can go ahead and plan all you want now. So.
Do we need to vote on the Christmas Eve one?
No, I don't.
I think we'll pass. Okay, thanks, Bill.
That's all, thanks.
Anyone have any declarations of conflicts or ex parte communications on any items? Seeing none, we'll move on to item E, which is the consent agenda. Chris, would you please read the consent agenda items?
Case number P1318 Audrey Acres subdivision, the final plat phase by Alata Storage LLC as the owner and the developer Dargel Clark on property located along the west side of Southwest Indian Hills Road, lying halfway between Southwest 33rd Street and Southwest 37th Street, outside the city limits by all within the city municipal service area and the 3-mile extraterritorial jurisdiction within the unincorporated Shawnee County, Kansas.
Thank you. This item does only require a motion and second. Is there a motion?
I'll move we accept it.
I'll second.
Chris, please call roll.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Crook?
Aye.
Mr. Beck?
Aye.
Mr. Beardmore?
Aye.
Ms. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Jefferson?
Aye.
The motion passes by a vote of 6.
Item F is a public hearing, and I'll turn this over to Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item is actually a zoning case before you tonight that you initiated back in August as a body. To give you a little bit of background, the request is from the Topeka Planning Commission to change the zoning classification at 1600 Southwest Harrison from M1 HL to M1. The HL would be removed, which stands for Historic Landmark Overlay. That would be removed as a result of some circumstances that have happened here in the last year. The property was originally designated as a historic landmark locally back in 2007. In 2012, last year, the city cited the property for an unsafe structure, which the property, or the structure itself, is a church, Walnut Grove Methodist Church, built early turn of the century. The Landmarks Commission recommended a certificate of appropriateness to demolish the structure. City Council did uphold that recommendation in August of this year, and subsequently to that, you initiated a rezoning to remove the overlay zoning for its historic landmark status. So this is really a kind of a cleanup in more ways than one. The property should be, is on schedule to be demolished by the end of the year. We would move that, or ask you to approve the motion tonight to remove the HL overlay zoning and return the property zoning to M1. Stand for any questions.
Any questions for staff?
Yeah, Bill, just information, the city's demolishing the property, and the cost of that would be adhered to the property itself through a property tax type situation?
Correct. What happens is, since the property owner is absent and non-responsive, the city goes in and would pay for the demolition. We would also put that cost on as a lien on the property tax, and so that we could recover some of that eventually when the property sells. Probably in a tax sale, more than likely.
Did I see that they're like 1 year in arrears as far as the taxes are due, or?
You know, I'm not sure if they're in arrears or not on the property taxes. It would make sense if they're not responsive that they are, but for some reason, I found it strange that they weren't that far removed from being up on their taxes.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions before we open up public hearing? Seeing none, I guess the applicant has already spoke. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak for or against this item this evening? Seeing none, any other discussion before we close the public hearing? Close the public hearing and have our discussion.
Nothing to add. I'd make a motion that we approve the removal of the historic landmark overlay district designation.
Second.
Okay, Chris, please call roll.
Mr. Crook?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Jefferson?
Aye.
Ms. Jordan? Mr. Beardmore?
Aye.
Mr. Beck?
Aye.
The motion passes with a vote of 6.
Thank you. Next item is item G, and the initiation of Westboro Neighborhood Conservation District, and I'm assuming Mr. Warner is there to talk to us.
I am, Commissioners. Dan Warner with the Planning Office.
Going to talk to you about the Westboro Neighborhood Conservation District. I want to point out a couple things real quick before we get into the short presentation that we're asking your action this evening be to initiate this process. We need that first step in order to come back for a public hearing in December. So if you provide that initiation, we're initiating the zoning change. The NCDs are zoning changes. Once we go through that step, it's back for a public hearing where we can get into the details a little more. So the city created the NCD enabling ordinance earlier this year. Some of you were probably part of that process. The map on the overhead, the neighborhood is bounded by Huntoon, Engage, and Oakley and 17th Street. So the Westboro Homeowners Association approached the planning department asking for assistance shortly after that ordinance was adopted. City staff assisted with the Westboro inventory and also worked with the neighborhood on various design details. The overall objective of a neighborhood conservation district is to protect the residential character from incompatible new construction or modification. The zoning, as I stated earlier, the NCD is a zoning overlay. It's administered and enforced by the planning office. And then the design standards that are in that document reflect the existing character of the neighborhood. The NCD design standards apply to residential property only. The Westboro neighborhood has an existing commercial center at Huntoon and Oakley. That is not part of this application. It's just the residential properties in that neighborhood. The NCD design standards address new construction and its substantial additions. And substantial additions are defined in there. They are visible from the public right-of-way and also have a square footage greater than at least 10% of the primary structure. Ordinary maintenance is not covered by the NCD design standards, so painting the existing structure or putting a new roof on the existing structure does not have to comply. It's the addition to that structure that's visible from the street would have to match the materials from the existing structure and comply with the block that it is on. Just a couple examples of standards and kind of how we got some of the things in there. Most of the standards in that document are based on a block character. So the neighborhood's relatively large, but each block has sort of a different thing going on depending on where you're at. So the example on the overhead is the garage placement character. So each of the properties in that area were evaluated and then assigned a character for the block. So the point of that is, depending on what block you're in, and you wanted to build a new garage, that garage would have to be placed on the property and honor the character of the block. One other design detail to note in the document is that for the most part, the Westboro neighborhood does not have front yard fences, and for the vast majority does not have it. So one of the design standards is that there will be no fences or walls in the front yards of these properties. The Westboro HOA held the required 2 public meetings. The ordinance requires 2 public meetings. Staff met with members of the Westboro neighborhood on at least 5 separate occasions. The Westboro application was approved by the Westboro board, and the application is complete, and we feel it complies with the requirements set out by the ordinance. So the action that we're seeking again tonight is for the Planning Commission to initiate this process. Assuming that happens, we will the neighborhood will hold another public meeting for the overlay zoning change. That will be a 3rd public meeting, and that meeting is the typical meeting that we have for zoning cases. And then we'll have a public meeting, or a public hearing on December 16th. So we'll come back for that public hearing in December. If the commission feels it necessary to get into this document a little more before that public hearing, we could have a study session at some point prior to that meeting to talk about it. And with that, that's my presentation.
Any questions for Dan regarding this? Is my understanding this is not a public hearing, correct? This is just an action item.
Oh, that's correct. Yes.
Dan, the draft of the plan, when does it become final? Is that something we act on?
You will come back and act on the overlay zoning, and thus that document, that's the design standards for the overlay zoning. So when we come back for a public hearing, you recommend approval of all of that to the city council. City council has the final up or down vote on the zoning change. So the document comes along with the zoning change.
We should be drilling down into those items to see if we got an agreement with them, or is it more their business than ours?
You want to try that one?
Can you say that one more time?
Well, there's a lot of detail about what's allowed and what's not allowed in the document, and do we render an opinion on that, or is that really up to their decision?
Yeah, I mean, this is a design, these are design standards that you absolutely have the ability to look at and say, are these reasonable? Do they fit? Based on testimony either from staff or from the neighborhood or from your own observations. Absolutely, yeah. So they were, what's before you is the application itself. I don't want to misrepresent anything here other than to say the application, we worked with the neighborhood on to get it to the point that is before you. Does that mean we are recommending approval yet on everything in there? No, that's something, we're just saying tonight that it fits the requirements to be applied for. It has all the things in there that it's supposed to have, and as to the, whether one standard is complete or not, or you feel it's reasonable or not, is totally up to you at this point. And that's why I think Dan had recommended, if you want to get into it a little bit before a public hearing, we certainly could bring that back next month at one of your meetings to talk more about.
I personally think it would be helpful to have a little open discussion on what's in the plan and be able to discuss those items. I don't know if we put it on next month's policy board meeting, would.
We can. I think it would, one of the, yes, we'll look at our schedule. One of the things we also want to, and I know it's not a public hearing tonight, but I do know we have some representatives from the neighborhood here. I think that there may be some consideration for one of them to speak, at least as a representative before you, since they are asking you. It's not us, it's actually technically the neighborhood, so. Yeah.
Any other questions for Bill or for Dan?
I guess I have one quick question for you. When it talks about fences and walls, I assume in the details of the application, retaining walls are not included as a wall for earth retainage? Or is that a detail that has not been worked out?
Yeah, I don't think retaining walls are what we're talking about here. If we want to specify that even more, we can. But that wasn't the intent. The intent was the privacy or property line fences and walls.
Well, I think we would open it up. If someone from the neighborhood would like to speak, we will give you that opportunity, since Bill strong-armed us.
I don't think I've ever seen Bill strong-arm anybody. Mr. Chairman, the question that he had asked about the retaining walls are strictly just that. If they're leveling the property up, what we're in reference to is a fencing wall. We wouldn't want somebody to come in and put a 5-foot tall brick wall around their property. We started this process about a year ago, and we have had a lot of support from the other neighborhoods, the other communities in the city. College Hill, Briarwood, they're interested in the same process that we have. And the things that we put into this, they were notified by Susan, Bill's office, and there were 362 homes that had notifications. Out of 362 homes, we had 3 homes that were concerned about issues that Bill addressed at the meeting. And we had the second hearing. In the second hearing, there was only 1 home out of 362 that had concerns. And by the end of the meeting, he said that he felt like that everything was in good shape. So what we're trying to do is preserve the integrity of a premier neighborhood in the city, which College Hill would like to follow suit, as would Briarwood. But, you know, the decay of the city is always on the top of the list for everybody in Topeka and has been for years and years. And we can see where it's finally starting to move forward with the new mayor and with Bill in place and his staff, that there have been enough concerned citizens that they want these projects to move forward, because it's the only way you can prevent decay from happening to these historic neighborhoods. We didn't want to take a step to go to the historic neighborhood, because that does even control replacing, you know, the siding on the house. People in Potwin cannot even use any kind of a composite siding. You know, as they come out with newer research and have great siding that can last for 50 or 75 years, they're not even allowed to do that. So the neighborhood conservation districts are not that strict. That's why we chose this one over the historic district. So, are there any other questions that I might be able to answer for you?
Mr. Chair, just for purposes of the record, could you identify yourself?
Tony Beck, and I'm president for the Homeowners Association this year. No relation. It's not nepotism.
Maybe way back when. But
Exactly. Thank you.
thank you, Tony. Well, I think as it was mentioned before, this is not a vote tonight. This is simply to allow the process to move through to a public hearing, at which time all these other items could be vetted as well. So, if the commission so chooses, what would you like to do?
Mr. Beck, I would suggest
Yes, Mayor.
making a motion to initiate
Right.
the application process, just so
Yes.
that it's in the record.
Thank you.
I move to initiate the application process.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Chris, please, call roll.
Mr. Beardmore,
Aye.
Mr. Beck,
Aye.
Mr. Crook,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Jefferson,
Aye.
Ms. Jordan.
Aye.
The motion passes by a vote of 6.
We look forward to going through this and digging into it as we go forward. Item H is a discussion item for Bill.
Yeah, I wanted to pass the baton over to Susan Hanslick to walk you through. You should have a PowerPoint printout in front of you for the Historic North Topeka East Plan. You also have the document that was sent to you last week. I think for purposes of this discussion tonight, she's gonna try to focus on that PowerPoint as more of a summary for you to get your feet wet, if you will, on the plan, because it is pretty thick. And then, so consider this sort of a work session, if you will, and feel free to interrupt her and ask questions as you need. Okay. All right, thanks.
So this began back, we had our first kickoff meeting with the neighborhood on April 10. And for that, we sent out mailers to every registered property owner and invited them to come out. And what we presented there was a series of existing conditions. So we've had a lot of public involvement here, be it with the kickoff meeting. We had a steering committee that met with us, with staff and other agencies 5 times over the summer. We held a kickoff meeting on August 14, and we held our final touchdown meeting on October 16. During that time, we also presented updates to the NIA at their bi-monthly meetings and answered any questions and tried to get as many people informed and aware of the process as we could. So the first thing was the plan had originally been done back in 1999. And so what we wanted to do is look and see what had been changed, what accomplishments had happened since then. So one of the big ones was looking at North Kansas Avenue. And in your handout, you can see some of the pictures that were taken of the building facades back in 1999, and then see the transformation that is NOTO today. So you've got activities going on, you've got new shops opening, you've got the First Friday events. Then looking accomplishment-wise, the Great Overland Station has become a focus point down in the area. Mixed use has become prominent along the North Topeka, or the North Kansas Avenue, allowing for the artists to work above their studios and to have more of a integrated environment. There have been huge improvements with the parks and the green space, with improvements being made up at Garfield Park and the Soldier Trail. The gateways to the community have been improved with the use of different landscaping techniques. Curtis Junior High has been reused and renovated with a pioneer group. And one of the big things was the land use plan was redone to reflect what was actually on the ground. In 1999, there was a lot of higher uses allowed, whereas it was actually being used for low-density residential. And so all the recommended land use changes in the plan were done so that now we've got more of the low-density traditional neighborhood that's actually reflected on the ground out in historic North Topeka East today. So one of the first steps staff did was to look at the existing conditions. And so what we did was we compared what the 1999 plan showed to what was on the ground today. So the first thing we looked at were housing conditions. And in that we saw a decline in the northeast, southeast, and southwest areas, and an improvement in the northwest area. Basically, it seemed like the areas away from the major roadways, more out of sight, tended to have a bit more of a decline as far as the structure conditions went. For home ownership, there was actually a change. Instead of having one area in the neighborhood that was concentrated as a rental area, it's been spread out throughout. It's not necessarily gotten worse or gotten better, but instead of having one area being a concentrated rental block, it's spread out a little bit. There's still areas that have a high rental concentration, but on the whole, it's more dispersed. We also took note of the number of code violations that were in the planning area, and that was just based off of 2012 cases. And the really interesting one was major crimes, and that's the Part 1 crimes, the murders, the assaults, the robberies, the burglaries. Back in 1999, there were blocks that had upwards of 41 crimes per year. And using the same rating system, the worst two blocks had 6 crimes in them. So that showed a huge decrease in the number of severe crimes that were occurring. We looked at infrastructure, and in that it tended to have relatively decent infrastructure. However, once you got away from the major roads again, up into the corners of the area, that tended to show a bit more need for improvement. And we also looked at the historic structures that were still present. So we looked at the structures that were built prior to 1915 and saw a relatively large concentration of those in the Noto area, in the couple of blocks along Jackson, and then over in Little Russia. And so the big takeaway points from the existing conditions was that we did provide more improved protection for the residential areas through changing the zoning. The mixed use has become firmly established along North Kansas Avenue. There's been an overall slight decline in housing conditions and lower home ownership, an increase in code violations, but significantly less major crimes. Yes?
On the major crimes, what kind of time period is that?
That was for all of 2012.
Just 1 year?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
At the kickoff meeting, we wanted to know how we did, we asked the residents, we had this plan back in 1999, we set forth these goals, we created this vision statement with you. How have we done? We wanted to get a baseline and get their input as far as what's been done, what's changed, what we still need to work on. And so the next slide is not slide, but in your packet is showing the kickoff meeting survey with the vision statement. And so that's where we pulled out these 11 goals that had been developed in the vision statement and asked them to rate it, on a scale of A through F, passing or failing, how did we do? And so the only A that we got was with the Great Overland Station becoming a prominent feature. The only F that we got was turning the riverfront into a destination park. So everything else is showing that, North Crossings is doing good, and so that's the Noto Riverfront, Great Overland Station area. That's doing good and showing progress. Preserving historic buildings on North Kansas is showing passing grade. Pride and commitment in all the North Topekans. And then the ones that we need a bit more work on is reusing the schools, having sidewalks filled with patrons at night, improving school enrollment and test scores, I-70 work, residential home reuse, and new infill and new homeowners. So that gave us a sense of what they thought of the vision statement and areas that we needed to go and directions that we needed to pursue. And then we also took the goals, the guiding principles that were stated in the 1999 plan and asked them to rate those as far as priorities. What's a high priority, what's a low, medium priority, what's low, and what's already been accomplished. And so, the high-ranking priorities were keeping the trucks away from Noto. They didn't want to have any heavy trucks driving down there and creating a disturbance. So heavy truck routes, urban drainage and infrastructure, downzoning, preserving historic buildings, reducing mobile homes, and promoting the entertainment district. And that's the riverfront, Noto, and North Crossings. Those all ranked as a high priority. Medium priorities were home ownership, continuing work on the riverfront, promoting the gateways and edges, parks and open space. And then low priorities were mixed use, reusing commercial and school buildings, creating design standards. And then the one that they said was already done was taking care of the red water problem. All right, so now moving into the 2013 plan. What we did was we worked through with the steering committee as far as updating the more detailed sections of the plan, recognizing we couldn't necessarily accomplish that at a public meeting setting. We worked with them, had 5 meetings, and so the first section we looked at was land use. And what the steering committee came back with was keeping and expanding the North Topeka Boulevard Greenway. They liked the definite edge that it gave to their community. They liked the open space along that, and it's just a series of little triangular-shaped almost pocket parks that are along North Topeka from Morse upwards past Soldier Creek. They liked keeping mixed use. They thought it gave the community a good opportunity to let the market balance commercial and residential and to see which came to be important to the area at that time and gave it a bit more flexibility for the development that might occur. They also supported creating a neighborhood commercial node at the intersection of North Topeka and St. John. Something like that would just be a small commercial enterprise that would serve the needs of the neighborhood rather than attracting people from the outside. So more of a, something more useful to the neighborhood. And they also wanted to make sure to keep Veterans Park in the northeast area up by the river as open space. Those 2 parcels weren't designated as such, but they're currently being used as such, and so they wanted to make note of that. The next thing we started looking at was identifying a sort target area. And so to do that, we overlaid the 5 existing conditions maps and the historic structures maps to try to come up with what the most in-need blocks are. Everybody,
Susan, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure everybody knew, when we talk target area, the city, and Susan starts getting into this evaluation, the city council designated this neighborhood for investment. One of the two neighborhoods we do every 3 years for investment. Significant infrastructure and housing investment where we concentrate in the two neighborhoods. So this, and just want to make sure, this was one of the reasons we're updating the plan, is this was one of the selected neighborhoods. So as Susan goes through the target area evaluation, that is the whole concept of, instead of putting the investment throughout the entire neighborhood, we needed to choose a 4 or 5 block area, for instance, of where to go with that. So, sorry to interrupt, Susan, but yeah, I know there's some folks that may not know our city process for selecting these neighborhoods and where that came from.
thank you. Okay, so, yes, the main goal of everybody that was on the steering committee was to figure out the best use of these funds. And so, looking at that we could only use it on a small area, the goal with the steering committee was trying to figure out what the best use and the best location for that was, and to try to get the most return on the investment, but to also stimulate other private property owners and other entities to invest in the area or outside of that area as well. So by overlaying the 6 maps, it gave us a picture of what the worst of the worst was. So that brings us to the purple map, which the black areas show those blocks that were consistently most in need. And so that allowed us to objectively look at this and to see which areas could most benefit from this, that we thought we'd get the best, be able to stabilize this fund. So the next slide shows the target area evaluations, and that's taking the 5 areas that were most in need and comparing them to where the anchor areas were and where the stable residential blocks were, the strengths and potential areas. So you see we've got a block around the west central area is designated with number 1. Pioneer Curtis Junior High is at area number 2. Number 3 is the east central area. Number 4 was the northeast quarter. And then number 5 was Little Russia. And that was in the order that the steering committee ranked them. So some potential target area projects that we considered was infill housing, remodeling of existing housing, demolition, street and curb repair, sidewalks, neighborhood parks, cul-de-sac improvements, and alley improvements. So the next slide in the handout shows the primary target area. And it's roughly from Morris to Gordon and from Harrison to Central. And the steering committee felt that that captured a good area that needed help, but that was also bordered by stable areas that would help promote its continuing development. The slide that's up and the next one in the handout shows potential project areas. Some suggestions on there are infill housing, major rehab as identified with structures that were showing in deteriorated conditions during the building analysis, street repair, we could do brick street repair, we could do new sidewalks, brick sidewalks, concrete improvements on the alleyways, and then potentially a park, neighborhood type size park that could be phased in and possibly in conjunction with a community garden. The next couple of slides just show various images on how, if the brick streets and sidewalks were improved and new, it would change the appearance of the block by taking out the asphalt patches that have been done for utility repairs and creating just a complete brick street would improve the appearance of that. A possible SketchUp for a park, just something small, neighborhood green space that children could go to without having to worry about crossing busy intersections. And then the other idea the steering committee came up with was looking at the cul-de-sac on Central Avenue and coming up with some type of either art display or something to put in the center of that to break up the blank expanse of concrete, and something that could promote the area, could promote the identity. We also identified a secondary target area, that was the Pioneer Curtis Junior High area, just as a, should funding not be used completely in the primary, we wanted to make sure there was something identified as far as housing repairs, street repairs that could be accomplished to make sure we can take advantage of all the funding available. The circulation section of the plan, we updated that. The steering committee was highly in favor of expanding and using wayfinding signs to draw attention to the new destination points that are in North Topeka. So the NOTO, the Great Overland Station, hopefully the Riverfront Park, but just drawing attention to these attractions that are there that might not be apparent to just the person driving by. And so not only improving what the North Topekans have, but making sure that visitors and outsiders can see what all's there and recognize the improvements that are being made. They want to keep the heavy truck traffic away from the NOTO area, and currently that's already been taken care of with the transition from industrial uses down along the railroad tracks. And they've phased themselves out, so at this point that's not a concern, but they want to make sure that nothing starts up again to negatively impact what they've got. They want to connect with the Bikeways Master Plan and make sure that what they've got going on is done in conjunction with the other planning activities that are going on. And they want to work on pedestrian connections. That was huge. One of the big ones was a pedestrian bridge across the Union Pacific Railroad tracks down at the North Kansas Avenue. And these are just some sketches about potential stylings, just to give you an idea. Nothing's set in stone as far as we don't have any further plans on this, but it is something to consider as far as promoting the safety of increasing this as a destination area. Not only would it provide a way for people to get across the tracks, but it could also be a destination of itself with people coming just to have the experience of watching the trains go by underneath. We looked at the North Crossings and the improvements that have been made in that district. And so with NOTO, since they started, there have been 29 new businesses that have gone in at the last count. And every month I hear a higher number for the number of people that are generated, number of people that come to visit for the first Friday Art Walks. The Great Overland Station has been completed. At the time of the first plan, it wasn't. And they've just been expanding, and they've got the railroad park that they're working on at this point. And then the final design there is of the proposed riverfront park. So again, looking at something that's going to increase recreation options and again promote North Topeka as a destination. And so design ideas for the riverfront park include everything from a trail and a walkway to educational components to an amphitheater, and just really turning it into a destination point that could serve a lot of users. Some potential projects that could be done to support the progress that's been made in North Crossings would be to improve the Veterans Park. There are already ideas out there as far as reworking the parking lot that's directly behind NOTO with landscaping and improving the appeal of that. And then that would be done in conjunction with improvements with the Veterans Park on the other side of the bridge. Having some type of children's park so that when the parents are down at NOTO looking at the art, there'd be something for the kids to be entertained with as well. Improving the trees and landscaping along North Kansas Avenue. And then connecting art to the neighborhood. So it's not just NOTO operating independently of the neighborhood, but rather, tying in perhaps art done by the NOTO artists that is located on the right-of-way or in the cul-de-sac. There's something to to connect it more rather than them being two separate users of this area. Moving on to housing, the various projects that could be done are rehab housing, which is broken down between whether it's an owner-occupied unit or it's a rental. Depending on which it is, would lead to the amount of funding that could be done for it. Owners would be eligible up to a $30,000 grant, whereas landlords would be eligible for a $15,000 grant that would just be for exterior repairs and HVAC repairs. Another option is infill housing, and then there's the city's voluntary demolition program that could be done for owners should they want to apply for that. One of the big things we wanted to do is to make sure that any new construction fits. We don't want anything to stand out as an eyesore or to look like it just doesn't really belong to the neighborhood. So what we wanted to do is look and see what's there. And so we looked at what historic North Topeka East looks like, and it's got a narrow frontage. The windows look traditional and proportionate to the size of the structure. The structure itself is tall or square. It's not a squat ranch style. The roofs match the predominant building style. Most are rear garages with alleys, and houses are made with natural or natural-type materials. So the next illustration is just showing how those various concepts look on paper, how a garage in the front doesn't really fit with the styling, or too much glass, or a ranch-style building just doesn't fit in. The next illustration is actually showing one of the housing and neighborhood development homes that went in on Quincy Street. So the first image is showing it without the home, and then the bottom image is showing the home that went in, and it does fit with the character. It's got the elevated front porch, it's got the full usable front porch space, relatively tall building that fits in with the style. Unless you knew what you were looking for, it doesn't stand out as something that was done in the last couple of years.
Got a fence.
Got a fence.
Very perceptive.
And then the other thing to consider is the fact that garages do play a large role as far as the appearance and the feel of a neighborhood. And so we are recommending that garages be in the back, which I think nearly all the houses I looked at over in historic North Topeka East already have access off the alleyways. But then that leads to the question of whether an attached or detached garage is more fitting with the style and provides the most benefits for the homeowners. So some of the things to consider in that are the safety ideas and making sure that it follows the SEPTED principles, so crime prevention through environmental design, making sure that it protects the house as much as possible and deters crime as much as you can with a site plan. We want to make sure it fits in, it looks good, and it provides the residents with the most amount of usable space. And so our next step will be a public hearing with you all next Monday. And I can answer any questions.
And Mr. Chair, if I may add to Susan's presentation at the end, she did not go over the implementation section of the plan at this point. We just had although it's outlined in the plan, filling in the numbers, the cost estimates, and some of the sequencing for those projects were to be determined through our community meeting, which was held last week, and then through any comments we have tonight. So we will be forwarding you this week the final implementation section, the actions and the target area recommendations in more fine-grained detail. So just to let you know.
All right, thank you.
Well, I have a question. Will part of that information deal with how you enforce or require making construction fit, all the details of how that all works, or how do you implement that?
Well, good question. How do we do that today? Today was a great example. The only real way to do it is either through incentives, and we have a tax rebate program that if you build something in the tax rebate area, it does need to comply with the design guidelines of the comprehensive plan before you can get that rebate. The other way of regulating that is what you saw tonight, was through the Neighborhood Conservation District that Westboro is approaching you on and going through. That's actual zoning, and that's real teeth. The economic incentives obviously don't happen for everything. So in this case, their policy in the plan, and we intend to carry through on those through the rebate program. And then potentially, there could be a conservation district that comes along and incorporates those even more. There could be a historic district. I know there was a survey done for the Noto area. There's enough integrity there to potentially do one. So, not that those would all be used, but there's a start for some guidelines for historic district if that came about. So but that's how we implement those.
Question. Any other questions for Susan?
And I'm sorry, and I'll add one more, since she put the slide in here about garages and the city house, city build house. We do work with, obviously, the city, our Housing Neighborhood Development Department does follow the guidelines. So for anything that uses city money, we do as well.
Susan, as far as the public involvement in all the meetings, can you give us a sense of how much involvement and whether it was residents or businesses or the makeup of it?
At the first meeting we had, there were over 30 people that attended, and then we had 6 volunteers to be on the steering committee, and that was we had the NIA represented, we had Noto represented as a entity, we had a Noto business owner, we got input from the Great Overland Station, Topeka Rescue Mission, the various Parks and Rec agencies, and then at the final meeting, we had, I believe, 13 people show. So we had notices go out to everybody, all registered property owners, and we noticed to the extent that we could. And so we had the people come out that were interested.
And I'll add, the backdrop is this neighborhood 10 years ago did not have a neighborhood organization, and NIA it struggled to organize themselves. Since then, there has been more organization, but this is one of the things that we are hoping that this go around, the last plan kind of focused to some extent on that Noto area, on the riverfront area, trying to create a destination. This plan, this update, we're hoping to spill over more into the neighborhood and see real neighborhood improvements and build off of the investments that have been made and have started in the Noto area. And we're hoping organizationally, this will help the residents take ownership and help them organize more. So but the backdrop was there was a struggle there to be organized over the last 10 years.
Any other questions for tonight? Susan, you did a great job presenting. Thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Anything else? That is our last agenda item. And again, thank you all for being here this evening. And I think with that, we are adjourned.